What? YouTube is good. I will never figure out what this little 5-second video that pops up on Facebook every time is. So I'm just going to delete that to make sure people don't go to it.
Just making sure. Are you sure?
Are you positive you want to be on right now?
Was this a mistake?
There we go.
You get pocket dialed. I saw a story about who's the guy that plays the Hulk in the Marvel movies? What's his face?
I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name.
Apparently he's not very tech savvy, so he had his phone. He was doing like a live Instagram live, and he forgot to turn it off. So he's like sitting in the premiere of the movie before it comes out, of one of the Marvel movies, and everyone can hear the movie through his Instagram live. So like,
oh, that's funny.
And he's getting texts and calls, and of course, he's in the theater, so he's not going to answer it till someone finally like sends someone down to him and tells him to turn it off.
That's funny. Oh man.
So they make fun of him for being pretty ditzy about that.
Well, we do know that we're on right now, and we're doing this from my house, which is pretty neat to know that this is even possible. I remember whenever all this kicked off, Alan, and we started doing so much of this stuff online that I couldn't do anything from my house. It wouldn't roll. But we've since got an upgrade to our streaming power. So it looks like that we'll be able to do this when the need arises. My wife got called in today to go work a few hours at the Talbots here in Jackson. So the girls are back there taking a very well-timed nap so that Alan and I can get in our study today. And I know, Alan, you and Melanie got your schedule going. You have Annabelle back now, I think, right?
Yeah, she's taking a nap too, so they're both down. So this is good.
I mean,
good timings.
I don't want to say that we are parenting examples, but I'll let other people make those conclusions. Thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. I see a number have joined in with us on Facebook, and we're streaming on YouTube as well. Thank you so much for being here. And we are excited about getting into the 10 Commandments today, or it's what could be also called the 10 Words. The Decalogue is the kind of academic term for what we have here within Exodus 20, being deca, being the word for 10, and log, similar to the word logos or logos in the scriptures, which is reference to Jesus being the word. So you have here in the Jewish understanding, the Decalogue, the 10 words. We are going to be covering this chapter of Exodus 20 today and Friday. There is just so much. Alan and I were talking beforehand. There's just so much here within the text that we can discuss and look at it from a variety of perspectives. Of course, one of the things that I talk about, at least I've talked about a lot recently, is making sure that we try to read the Old Testament text with Old Testament eyes. And it can be easy for us to come into this text with our 21st century Western eyes, and we understand and therefore then make application from our perspective. But it's good for us to look at the text in its original context, who it was written to, the times it was written in, so we can understand it in the most accurate way. And then we take that understanding and we make application to our own lives. That's what we're going to try to do this afternoon as we begin looking through the 10 Commandments in Genesis chapter 20 and verses 1 through 8. Before we get into the text, I want to give just a little bit of a catch up, a little bit of an intro into what we have here within this text. Of course, we are walking through history, walking through the story of God that is found within the word that he inspired, what we know as the Bible. We have worked our way through the book of Genesis, which is the beginning of this great story. And within Genesis, of course, we have a number of events that shape really what we have here within Exodus. Of course, the first event is what takes place in the garden. The fact that God created this world and then created this habitation in which man would dwell in the Garden of Eden, and there God, his presence would be as well, be his dwelling place too here on earth, that perfect place where the intersection of the heavens, his space, God's space, and man's space intersect. Of course, there is the sin that is brought on by the temptation of the serpent, which leads to Adam and Eve being expelled from the garden. We have the account of the great sin that takes place in Genesis chapter 6, which leads to the earth being recreated in a sense through the destruction of the flood, and humanity being restarted through the family of Noah. And then Genesis chapter 11, we have the Tower of Babel, where men once again rebelled against God, sought to force God's hand in a way to come down to them and to acknowledge their greatness and the advances that they had made as a human society. And whenever God did come down, he didn't do what they wanted, but instead he scatters them. And in a sense, he starts over again, this time with the family of Abraham. That family of Abraham is traced all the way from Genesis 12 through the rest of the book of Genesis, through Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob, and then the many sons, the 12 sons that Jacob has. They end up finding their way down into Egypt, where they are kept safe and protected. They're able to grow there within the land of Egypt. But once we get to Exodus, we enter Exodus actually thinking about what Joseph says at the end of Genesis, that the Lord has brought you down here to grow you, and that you're going to return to the land, that the promises the Lord made to our father Abraham, which was the great land promise, the great nation promise, and eventually all that leading to the seed promise, where through Abraham's family, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Joseph understood that here God was going to bring us out of this place. And we see once we get into Exodus that they are brought up out of the land of Egypt by the mighty hand of God. Through his miraculous deeds, the Lord came in with his spokesman Moses and Aaron and showed his great power over Pharaoh and the gods and the people of Egypt. And he has brought them now to Sinai, and after bringing them through the Red Sea, which is a baptism of sorts, as 1 Corinthians chapter 10 tells us, after he brings them to this place, now it is time for him to establish this covenant. He has created them as his people. That's really how I want us to frame what is here within this text, is that God has selected this people. He selected them beginning with Abraham. And we kind of follow the selection process. First, God selected Adam and Eve as his people. Well, that didn't work out. Then he had Noah's family as his people. That didn't work out. Then he narrows it all the more to Abraham's family. And this family of Abraham is the family he is going to protect and help to flourish. And he has brought them to this place here at Sinai. And now it is time, through them seeing all the signs of God, again, what took place in Exodus with the plagues and what just took place with the parting of the Red Sea and the destroying of Pharaoh and his army, that should lead them to a place where they understand what we see in verse number 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. That's where it begins. It begins with this belief, this acknowledgement of who God is. And then let me suggest to you that what we see then in the rest of this text is God setting the standard, laying down the standard for you being my people. This is the expectation for you. I really like the way that Michael Heiser frames this text. He says what we have here within this text is a perfect example of believing loyalty. Believing loyalty. It is belief. It is trust in God that got them into this place where they would be the people of God. God chose them. He delivered them. He protected them. He brought them into this place where they were his people. Now it is time for them to show their loyalty, to show their true trust, and to show that belief in God. And in doing so, they would have great blessings. We can read about that beginning in verse number 6. We'll read that in just a moment. But if they did not believe, then there would be cursings. Again, we see that within the text as well. So as we're reading this text again, which is to us well known as the Ten Commandments, the Jewish people looked at it a little differently. They saw it as the 10 words, and then some even saw it as more than that. They did not see everything as an imperative. And if they did see everything as an imperative, then they would actually count it as 13, beginning with, for example, verse number 2, they would see that as a word. Even though it's not an imperative, it would be a word. So that's number 1. And then some of these will break down. So they can end up seeing this text where we see it as 10, they would actually see it as 13. But just to keep from being confused, what we have here are the 10 commandments as we know them traditionally, or the 10 words, or the Decalogue. So as we read through this, keep that in mind, that here is the people of God, and here is God now laying down, these are the terms of loyalty. If you will be loyal to me, this is what you'll do. This is what this relationship will look like. So let's read through the text. Alan, I actually want to read the entire Decalogue together, the entire 10 Commandments together through verse 17. But we're going to focus today just on the first 8 verses, which contains the first 4 commandments. Let's read then in the text. In Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 1. Exodus 20 and verse 1. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow and worship to them, and do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the father's iniquity to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female servants, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Verse 12, honor your father and your mother, so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony against your neighbor, do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. That is the reading of the 10 Commandments from Exodus chapter 20 and verses 1 through 17. Alan, there is so much rich teaching that can be dug out from this text. Why don't you begin just there at the beginning, and I'll add on a couple of notes here and there, what I've uncovered in my study. But what do you see here as being really the framework in which he's working with in giving these first 4 commandments specifically?
Well, I like, what we're going to do. We're going to look at these first 4 and then look at the final 6 and kind of split them in half, or almost in half. And the reason I think is pretty clear. These first 4 really deal with the people's relationship with God. So a lot of, the Sabbath, not taking the name of the Lord in vain, idols, no other gods. I mean, that's dealing with God. And then it's those last 6, honor your father and mother and do not murder. Those are how you deal, or those are laws dealing with individual relationships between one another. It's nice to divide it that way. And I want us to also kind of get the concept that these are not just individual laws that happen to make the top 10. They look like them when it says do not murder, do not commit adultery. Those look like, pretty cut and dry, just, laws that would just go in the list of, all the other laws that we see regarding sacrifices or the tabernacle or, slaves or whatever else, we see throughout Exodus and Leviticus. These are just like the top 10 or the best 10. I think these are more than that. And part of the reason I think that is because that's what I get from Jesus' interpretation of these. If you look through as we go, we'll kind of reference, I think, the Sermon on the Mount a lot, because he's asked, or he mentioned several of these 10 commandments. You've heard it said, do not murder. But I tell you, he does that several times with many of these things. So it's interesting because they seem pretty cut and dry. Do not murder. Okay, there's three. In English is three words. It's pretty simple. But you get the sense from Jesus that these are big picture principles, even bigger than just an individual, do this, don't do that law. And so they're some of them are simpler in that sense, but I think I don't want to say they're more interpretive, but they've got a broader envelope than what they seem. And even later on, when people ask Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Well, shouldn't he just list like commandment number 1? I'm the Lord your God, do not have other gods. Why wouldn't he say that one? Clearly, if this is the top 10 of the laws, then, commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. That is the most important law, if that's what these 10 commandments are. But if they are, guiding principles, and then there is no one law that's better than the other. And that's what Jesus kind of says. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Well, that's not in the 10 commandments. Wouldn't that be the best first law to put here if this was your top 10 of the laws? Well, that law, if you will, you shall love the Lord your God, that's almost presupposed here. That's, all of this whole thing falls apart if you don't love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. So you don't need that to be the first law. You don't really have a covenant if you don't love God. That covenant's not going to last. So it's partly it's unnecessary to have that as a statement here, but I think it's also a summary of the first 4. Which all of these, you don't have other gods, you don't take the Lord's name in vain, you remember his Sabbath, the Lord's Sabbath, which is the sign of the covenant. All of those things are going to be obeyed if you love the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul. So that law that Jesus mentions is, I think, a summary statement of the first 4. And what does he say next? What is the second greatest commandment? Well, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The last 6, that is a summary statement of those next 6 commandments. So I guess what I'm trying to express is that, don't think of these as just like a 10 bullet points or 10 checklists. Think of these in that sense. You have loving God, loving your neighbor. That's what all of these encompass. And then they get a little more specific in how you do that with each individual law. But even then, even those 10 are still very deep and guiding principles that permeate even the rest of the law. Everything that we do in regards to our neighbors, our slaves, our masters, how we deal with that is under the umbrella of, do you love your neighbor? And all the sacrifices, all of the all the priests and everything having to do with kind of the corporate worship, in the temple and the tabernacle, well, that has to do with, do you love the Lord your God with all your heart? If you do, then you will keep all these commandments. So that's kind of my big picture look at all of these. So yeah, we can get into the first one, which like you said, there's kind of some debate as to which is the first one. Is it verse 2 or is it verse 3? We typically think of verse 3 as the first of the 10, but so I kind of see verse 2 as just kind of a almost like a preamble or a pre. We sign our name at the end of the document. The Lord signs his at the beginning here.
Right. And if I can interrupt you just one second, Alan, I think one of the things that you're hitting at that I believe is extremely important is to recognize that the children of Israel, the Jews, the Hebrews, as they're walking around on a daily basis, they don't have a checklist in their hand containing these 10 imperatives, these 10 commands as we see them, which is really getting to what you're just talking about, what's first? Is it this statement, this word, in verse 2, or is it the actual first imperative in verse 3? Again, that goes back to just the way that we see what's here within this text. But they didn't walk around just with their parchment that had these 10, and at the end of the day, they went through and they looked at it very literally, and they said, okay, did I have any other gods before Yahweh today? Nope. All right, we're good. Did I make an idol today? Nope, we're good. Did I do this or that? Did I murder anybody today? Nope, you're good. They didn't do that. You have to, I think it is just so important for us to see this text as a statement of loyalty, and the fact that there is this text was not given to them as a blanket or as a checklist for them to just make sure they literally do not do only these things today. That if you are a part of God's family, it is so much more than just not murdering, but it also goes to, as Jesus went to, you have heard it said, and what they would do is they would take this very literally and say, just as long as I didn't murder today, I'm good. They did not consider the heart behind this command. It isn't just get as mad as you want to, get right up to where you have your sword raised to kill somebody, but as long as you don't swing that sword, you're good today. No, that's what Jesus is trying to get them to understand, that there is so much more to this text than just doing things. It is the heart. It is the understanding. It is belief. This is believing loyalty. Because the problem is, and as something as we talk about often whenever it comes to salvation, what's the substance of our salvation? Are we saved because we do these things? Well, if you say yes, then that really is the meritorious system that so many speak against, and I don't believe that's gospel. No, instead it is, I do these things because. It's not I do these things to receive something, but I do these things because I have received something. These people had been chosen as the family of God. And because they have been chosen into this family, it was now expected them to behave in this way, which one of the things that I really have seen as I prep for this study today is to see how much this goes back to representation and imaging, which goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. So much that is found here in these first 4 commands. So I really hope that we'll see that. And I guess one of the reasons I want to bring that up too is whenever we think about the law, we think of it as a bad thing, as, oh, the law was all about you got to keep it perfectly. Well, is that the way they saw these commands? Did they see these commands as a burden? Or did they see these commands as a way to, again, show their loyalty and to show that they were a part of God's family? Could it be that the Israelites saw these commands as a way to participate with God and to represent him to all the people? Remember, if we're going back in this text, what is the Lord wanting to do in making them a people and then giving them this law? If we go back to chapter 19 and verse number 5, if you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples throughout the whole earth, although the whole earth is mine, and you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. What were priests doing? Priests were mediating. What is this nation doing? Is mediating for the rest of the world, trying to draw the rest of the world to God through showing this is the right way to live. And in living this way, I'm showing my loyalty to God, and I'm showing them that this just is the better way. I think if we frame these commands in a I don't want to say more positive, because it's not that I'm trying not to be negative. I'm trying to be more accurate with the way they would see this. And I think that's the way they would see this. They would see this as the way to participate with God in being this kingdom of priests, trying to draw the nations back to them by showing their loyalty in these things, which begins, as you said, it all begins with the foundation. And that foundation is verse number 2, that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. Did they believe that? And if they believe that, Alan, if yes, I believe that. I believe that you have chosen me and my people, the Hebrews, as your people. Well, then God says, if you believe that, then this is how you show it to me. Number 1, do not have any other gods besides me.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet to remember is these 17 verses. This is the only part of the law that God literally spoke to them. Mm-hmm. So it's up until the end of these 10 commandments. God is speaking directly to the people. There is no mediator. There's no this wasn't delivered to Moses, who then told the people, like most of the rest of the law. This was God from the mountain, and the people heard, and the people trembled so much that they begged for a mediator after this. And I'm, I've read, I can't read Greek or anything or Hebrew, but I've read that anytime you see the you or your or any of those types of words, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, that you is actually singular instead of the plural you, like y'all. So this isn't y'all don't murder, speaking to the whole group. He's speaking individually to each person. You do not murder, you do not commit adultery. He's speaking to each individual person out there listening. So so these laws were very, very personal to the Israelites. I mean, it was given to them as a whole, but it was given to each individual person of that whole group. So makes it, to me, makes it more powerful. You mentioned a minute ago, our kind of, New Testament modern view of these is kind of almost negative.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is because so much text had to be spent in the New Testament getting people to not trust in the law for their salvation. Mm-hmm. So we see all that. We're like, oh, we don't, it's better for us just to not even worry about the 10 Commandments because they're not part of the new law anyway. Well, I mean, is that really true? Again, if these are guiding principles, then those principles are still the same no matter what. And and of course we can see throughout the New Testament, Jesus mentioning all of these, basically bringing them forward into the new covenant. Those same principles are still there, and the one that is not, the Sabbath, we're told, is a sign of the covenant. So that sign was for that covenant. So no wonder that one didn't roll forward. But we have I think we have something new, something different as a sign of the covenant today. So, but even the principle, the surrounding principle of the Sabbath day and the holy day, I think we'll see the principles connected to it are still with us today. So I understand why we look at the 10 Commandments almost in a negative sense, as a list of laws. But if we observe them as principles, as more general, like they are, then we'll see that they are supremely important. Because I mean, those guidelines, those principles are still how God would have his people serve him today and love him and love their neighbor as themselves.
Right. And all this again stems from the foundation of verse 2, and then verse 2 being the first word, you might say the first statement here within Exodus chapter 20. But then we finally get to the first imperative, the first command. So the CSB renders that, do not have other gods besides me. And again, we come to this from our New Testament perspective, and we almost approach this from the application perspective. To us, what is a god? Well, in our 21st century understanding, I'm thinking of a god, well, God might be money, or God might be politics, a God might be entertainment, God might be sports. But if we're looking at this again from the Hebrew understanding, the ancient Near East understanding, think about where they're coming out of. They're coming out of Egypt. What was a very staple of the religion within Egypt? Was it not the pantheon of their gods, and all the gods who were shown to be powerless in regards to the plagues that were just given? So to me, again, if I'm going to look at this from their perspective, to me, I see this as God saying these other gods, and by gods we're talking about, to me, again, looking at it from my perspective, my framework, I'm looking at this from a supernatural perspective. These other gods, which are just supernatural beings, created beings, I might add, and I really want to stress that, these other gods, little g gods, these supernatural beings that existed during this time and still continue to exist today, although I don't think they operate in the same way today. The Lord is saying, they did nothing for you. They can do nothing for you. I alone am the omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient God. I am the only one who has these attributes. Put no other gods before me. Whenever I see this, Alan, I see this as a very, very little statement. Don't worship other gods. They are nothing. What do you think here in verse number 3? I guess out of all these other ones, this is the one that might be the most foreign to us, just because the context, I think, has changed so much from this time of the giving of these commands.
The wording's important there. Most of us growing up with maybe different versions might say before, no other gods before me. Well, we kind of understand that one. There's God, there shouldn't be anything above that. Okay. I like the CSB because besides, it makes that a little bit bigger, not just before. If you say besides, no other gods besides me, that includes both before, beside, or around. So it really excludes any other worship besides Yahweh worship.
I like that. I think that's really good. Really good.
Yeah, which I mean, like you said, they came from Egypt. Well, there's kind of a hierarchy in Egypt too. I mean, there were gods that were better. The sun god Ra was better than the wheat god, whoever. There's kind of a hierarchy of the gods. Greeks and Romans, we know Zeus and Jupiter were like the chief gods of the Greeks and the Romans, and then there were lesser gods. So we know they came from a kind of hierarchy of the pantheon of gods there. Well, it would make sense, like I don't know that this one is necessarily reminding them that the Lord their God is the most powerful, but they're reminding them that the Lord their God is the only one. That, I mean, these others are not just lesser gods that you worship me first, and then you worship this guy when it's not raining, or when your crops are bad,
right,
or when you're having trouble with fertility or whatever.
That's what they would do. If they're having issues in those areas, the thoughts of the ancients was that, well, I must not be praying enough or offering enough sacrifices to the God who is in charge of this particular aspect of life. Like you said, if it's not raining, I need to pray to the rain god. If I'm having trouble getting pregnant, I need to pray to the fertility god. God's here saying, no, none of that. They are nothing. They are not me. I alone am the superior, supreme creator. And the one thing, if there's anything else, I think to really focus on here, the one thing that God could say that not only can no other supernatural being say, but nothing else can say, is that I'm not created. That to me is that is the boom, drop the mic statement. Out of anything else that has ever existed, God, Yahweh alone, can say, I am not created. I am. I am. Don't look to anything else. All these other supernatural beings that might exist, and again, that's coming from my perspective, the way I see this text. They are still created. They might be a supernatural being, but they're still created. I am not. And that alone shows me to be superior, supreme. You should not go with anybody else. Which thing about Alan too, Heiser brought this up. Looking at this, if you compare this to like a marriage, which a covenant, there's the comparisons there between marriage. What you're talking about, I think, is really good. What if we just told our wives, I'm going to have no other wife before you.
Now you're the most important wife.
Yeah, you're the most important wife. I might have another wife on the side, but no one's going to be before you. Well, here, what you just mentioned with this, I think that we see that wouldn't fly. Katie would not appreciate it if I said, you're my most important wife. She'd be like, "Oh, you're trying to be funny, because of course
I'm the most important. Wife and a Thursday wife, and then Melanie can be the weekend wife. Spend the most time with her there.
Exactly.
She's still number one. That's all right.
But yeah, I think what you're saying there is so key. The exclusivity of God, which verse number 5. Why have no other gods besides me? Excuse me. Why not make an idol representing me? Why not bow down to these idols? Well, because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Well, why is God allowed to be jealous? Well, because he's the one that created them. He's the one who has delivered them. He's the one who has chosen them. How dare they disrespect him by seeking after something else? the jealousy of God is completely understandable, even from our perspective.
This is one that you might think like, why are these two separate ones? Because doesn't
Yeah,
no other gods besides me kind of include not making an idol? And and yes, it would, except for the fact that, well, exactly what happens in chapter 32 later. And what typically does happen with the Israelites when they make idols, those are not usually idols to other gods.
right.
They are making an image and calling that Yahweh God.
Mm-hmm.
So that golden calf, it wasn't like, oh, all hell Baal, they're going to start worshiping Baal right there. No, they're worshiping God, and they just made this calf to represent him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think this is necessary to have as a separate law here. Do not make an idol of any shape or anything, because I mean, obviously that's what ends up happening. And even though they're trying to worship God, they would be worshiping him incorrectly and worshiping an image of him, which is not the true God, they're not the same one.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, by worshiping an image of him, a likeness or something that is not God, even though they're calling him by the same name, and they still refer to him as the God that brought us out of the land of Egypt, that they have created their own version of Yahweh God that has become an idol and is no longer the true God that they're supposed to be worshiping, and they have made a God besides the one God. So that's you. I think that's the focus of this one, not necessarily just watching out for little Baal statues and Asherah poles or whatever. This is really to prevent against that, worshiping God incorrectly, which I think makes it a lot more powerful for us today because, I mean, back then, they had the issue of actually worshiping little statues or whatever, but don't we have the issue today amongst Christianity as a whole and even the world as a whole? I mean, 95% of religious people of the world, I would assume, because I'm including, the Islam and Judaism. I mean, they all worship what they would consider to be this God that we read about in the Bible. They're not worshiping. I mean, of course, Islam calls him Allah, but they consider themselves to be worshiping the one true God, Yahweh, here in it, as he's talked about in the scriptures. Well, we know that many of these, many other religions like Islam, Judaism, or even amongst Christianity, they are worshiping versions of God that they have created. So even though they have the same name for him, even though they read the same text, they read the same, talk about the same people. I mean, Abraham and Noah and all these guys are mentioned in Islam as well, even though there's still there's some similarities that because they have not understood who God is. They've created a version of him. They've created an idol of him that is separate from who the true God is. And I think breaking this command right here to not bow and worship to them and making God jealous. Yeah, making him jealous against us.
What you just mentioned, I think, Alan, is maybe the focal point of this particular command, what we refer to as the second command, not making any idols, or the traditional understanding is you shall not make any graven images. If you look at it simply from the perspective of you shall not make anything that has anything to do with me, you shall not make any sort of physical representation of me, I think we run into problems there. Here's how we run into problems. What does God tell them to make, to include in the worship of with regards to the tabernacle and the temple, the Ark of the Covenant? What does he tell them to make? To fashion the cherubim and the other heavenly beings. So it cannot be that the Lord is saying you shall never make a graven image of any sort, because he would violate his own command there in them creating those images themselves that were included in the Ark of the Covenant. So the issue must be then, it must be two things, I think. Number one, you should not go on your own and think that you have the ability to capture my essence in something that can be made. Again, we're talking about the uncreated God. You cannot create something that has never been created. If you think that you can create me, number one, that's just silly. That's not going to work. But the number two is the bowing down part of it. What if they started to bow down to the cherubim and those things that were associated with the Ark of the Covenant? Well, that would have been inappropriate too. Even though God had told them to make it, they still were not to bow down to it as if it is God, because it's not God. It's just something that he told them to create, to be a part of the functioning within the tabernacle and the temple. So what you're saying there, I think is important to put those thoughts together. You can't capture God in some sort of image. They tried to do that with the golden calf. Did not work out. God did not appreciate that at all. But don't bow down to it. So somebody might ask, well, is it appropriate then to have any sort of like picture today of Jesus? Would that be inappropriate? Somebody would say, well, yes, you cannot do that because here it says you shall not have any sort of image. Well, is that the emphasis here? I don't think so. It comes back to the issue like of wearing a cross. Somebody wants to wear a cross on a necklace. Somebody say, cannot do that because that's an image. Well, is that the emphasis here? I don't believe it is. The emphasis here is the bowing down portion. Do we begin to worship that as if it is God itself? If we're doing that with a picture of Jesus, or especially a picture of, a white Jesus with blue eyes and blonde hair. That's a whole nother subject. Or, whatever is the cross. If you're doing that, then yes, that would be a breaking of what I believe is the prohibition here. And how serious does God take this? Well, if your father does that and that leads into generational sin, then you know that I'm going to hold you accountable for that. That I think that's what God is getting at here. The Lord your God, I'm a jealous God, punishing the children for the father's iniquity to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Somebody will say, well, see, God punishes people even if they're not guilty of sin. I don't believe that's what God's saying here. The guilt of your fathers and their sin, we should not be surprised whenever those who are guilty of sin, they lead their children into sin, and then they lead their children into sin. If they all hate the Lord, then the Lord is going to punish them. But for those who are faithful, those who love me and keep my commandments, the Lord says, I'm going to show faithful love to them. If your father was a heathen and did not obey me, and yet you do obey me and love me and keep my commandments, then I'm going to show my love to you. This here is serious business. You cannot think that you can create me, and you best not bow down to anything other than me.
This is one of those verses that always kind of makes me mad, because people will see this and say, oh, this is unfair. The third, fourth generation, what do they have to do with that first generation? Well, think about that. Third, fourth generation. So that is your grandchildren and your great grandchildren. Most people do not see their fifth generation either direction.
Yeah.
You're great. Some people do, yes, but for the most part, it's rare to see your great grandparents or to live long enough to see your great grandchildren, the fifth generation. So
I think I knew my great grandmother, my mom's mom.
Yeah, I knew two of my great grandparents.
I think that's all I had.
Even my children. I mean, they've known.
Oh, so
Annabelle was alive for three of her. I don't know. I've never known any.
Okay.
I was never alive for any greats.
Yeah,
so
mine was my great grandmother.
Well, so why the third and fourth? Well, think about it. Those are the ones that you're alive for. So you, in your iniquity, you have influence over your children to the third and fourth generation as long as you live. So it would make sense that your influence causes them to fall away and causes them to do the same. And especially, I mean, like we're talking about this, I don't think these are people that think they are being wicked. It's just these, in this instance, it could be people that have a wrong view of who God is. They're worshiping a version of God that is not true.
Right.
Well, that's easy to pass on to the children, to the third and fourth generation. So the consequences of that are dire for those generations. But hopefully, ideally, after you've, the beginner of that iniquity dies, then hopefully that can begin to take shape. But people always look at that and say, oh, that's not fair, but they forget about verse 6. Well, the iniquity is only for 3 and 4 generations. Well, how much is God's love? To 1,000
Wow,
generations.
that's
I
a great
mean,
comparison.
we're talking about
Yeah, great
2,000, I
contrast.
mean,
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of years. If I go back
Hmm.
1,000 great grandparents, before me, I mean, that's probably we're back to Jesus' day. So, so God's faithful love is so much more than the consequence of a father's iniquity.
Hmm.
So that's not saying that God's not fair. I think it's highlighting His love, His mercy, His justice, and and just showing the consequences of a father can continue for several generations because of His uh, continuousness of doing that.
Hmm.
Because He's still alive, He's still influencing His
Right.
children, and of course we see examples of that throughout the Bible. The some of the kings of Israel and all of that. And we see where that does get broken up too. I think of guys like King Josiah or King Hezekiah. I think both of them had pretty wicked fathers, well, and grandfathers. So Josiah specifically. So that third and fourth generation actually kind of stops a little bit early because of I guess, a soft heart of Josiah or whoever it was. So even that is not a hard, consequence, but is kind of a general consequence of doing of iniquity, basically, of a father's iniquity.
And you would think too, just talking about people being able to say, well, it's unfair that God would punish those who themselves were not guilty of sin. That happens all the time. That is something that is commonplace in our society. You think about the person who is the drunk driver who kills a mother of three out on the road. Well, who's suffering the consequence of that? Well, it's her children that she leaves behind. That's just a natural part of our world, is that those who sin, their sins often have negative consequences on someone else. Think about the Jews that went into exile. Were they the ones themselves that had started this cycle of sin? No. Were they guilty of sin themselves? Well, yes. But the plan set in place for them to be sent in exile, it didn't originate with them. That's just the nature of sin. Sin has long-reaching consequences from time to time, and a lot of that, Alan, comes from the third command here. Which, again, we look at this from our perspective, we might have a particular understanding of it, but I think looking at it from a better perspective, we can understand it more fully. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses His name. For us, that would, and so often when we come to this, we think, okay, that just means we don't need to use the name of the Lord flippantly. We don't need to see OMG or say OMG and things such as that. But what does it truly mean to misuse? Most traditional translations say, "You shall not bear the name of your Lord in vain." Alan, what did you find in your study for this particular command that might
That
shed some more light on what we have here?
that was my understanding. Looking at these as big principles, if we typically use this verse, like you said, to not say "oh my God" or "gosh" or any of those
Mhm.
other just type of flippant statements. Say just the actual saying it. Well, that's looking at this as a kind of black and white command law, just like the rest of them. If we are looking at this in a much more principled, big picture sense, that's why I like the CSB, do not misuse the name, not just take it in vain. That kind of, I think that phrasing, at least in the English, kind of limits our understanding about. But to misuse the name, that can be, how can we misuse the name of God? Well, we can say it in a wrong or disrespectful manner.
That's
Yeah, that's
definitely
one way.
included. Absolutely, that's included.
But what else does the name of God do? I mean, do we not bear the name of Christ when we put on His name in baptism, and when we call ourselves Christians? Are we not carrying that name with us when we do that? Well, how do we misuse that when our lives do not reflect the the thing that we are bearing? We our lives do not reflect what we have put on. We have put on this new man. We have put on Christ. Well, if we put on Christ and then misuse that, we continue in our previous sins, then we are misusing that name. And I think even more dire is if we do that, maliciously. We, obviously, there is sin, but there is, some people, they're baptized and then they have previous sins that are still bear consequences. Like I can think of like alcoholism or something. Just because you're baptized doesn't mean you never take a drink anymore. You never have issues with that. That's a little bit different than misusing the name of God. I mean, I think that's just trying to change your life and failing in that sense. But to misuse the name, to put on Christ like we do, and then not live to the best of our ability according to his commands and laws and how he would have us to live, then what's the consequence? The Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. So pretty serious thing right here to consider, much more so than just, oh, I shouldn't say, oh my gosh, or something.
Right. You will be my own possession out of all the peoples, and you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. These were the people of God. They were his representatives. Whenever people saw the Jews and they saw a Hebrew, they would have thought, these are the people of Yahweh. For them to misuse the name of the Lord, it includes the way they spoke. But it's so much more than that. It's the way that they behave. If they are to be the representatives of God and yet they are behaving in an ungodly way, are they not misusing the name of the Lord? Well, of course they are. And I think that's what you're saying, Alan, here. So it is so much more all-encompassing than just what you say. It is what you do. It is how you are to behave as a representative of God. And then lastly, and I'm going to kind of tie all these things together here at the end, but lastly, verse number 8 gets us to the Sabbath day. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Alan, this is I mean, we could probably talk about verses 8 through 11 for an entire show, just tracing the Sabbath theme from beginning to end of the scripture. But contextually here, Alan, what do you want to say about the Sabbath day and this particular command that is given to the people by the Lord?
Well, it's interesting. This one, and then do not make an idol for yourself. These get a lot more. I mean, a full paragraph for the Sabbath and a full paragraph for the idol, whereas
point.
The other two are just kind of a sentence or so. So you can.
That's right.
To me, that tells us what's kind of important, or what is definitely something we should listen to for. One reason might be because that might be something we are susceptible to. I'm not gonna spend too much time on you should not do drugs or something. That's not something I really have to worry about. But something else that I have to worry about. You should not lie. You should not take the Lord's name in vain. Some of those I want to study more. I want to spend more time on. So I think the Lord knows that this is going to be an issue, so He highlights it a little bit more. And of course, this is one that has a history to it. Harkens back, you are to labor 6 days, do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord. Verse 11, for the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea. It reminds them why that seventh day is set aside and is holy and is blessed. And one thing that makes this so incredible in the context of that ancient time is verse 10, because this isn't just, okay, hey, you should rest on the Sabbath. It is more. It is a command. But who is this a command for? You must not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, the resident alien who's within your gates. That is groundbreaking, because think about it. If you tell a rich man to rest, he's resting most of the time anyway. He's got people working for him. In this day and age, to allow a male or female servant to take a day off, take a break, your livestock to take a break, this really, I mean, I hate to use the word because it is kind of a terrible, or it has been desecrated nowadays, but this is about as progressive of a command as you can get, even in, up until modern times, but definitely back then. I mean, who cares about slaves back then? I mean, slaves are less than human. Um, your livestock, they're just you're supposed to kill them and eat them. Who cares about them? But God, in his, top 10 list, his, guiding principles for this nation, is setting aside this day and giving these people, that are completely forgotten about in all other laws and nations. He's giving these, the weakest members of the society, male, female servants, sons, daughters, livestock, aliens that live with you. I mean, these don't have rights back then, but here they have a right to a Sabbath rest, a break from that, those 6 days. So, I mean, in the context of other laws of this day, this was revolutionary. I mean, almost on the same level as monotheism compared to the polytheism around them. So it's good to think about that, because from our modern eyes looking back, we see all this, and it's, God talks about slavery and things like that, and we think, oh, this is an old, outdated document. Well, this document was far I mean, these words, this Bible is far and away way past where everyone was at this time. That's what made it so crazy and revolutionary. And these principles are still, I think, are still important nowadays. I mean, why is that Sabbath set aside? What's it for? It's supposed to be a time of worship, of rejuvenation, of focus, and I think we've seen already that it's supposed to be a day of trust. Because when we looked at the Sabbath a couple chapters before, what were they supposed to do the day before? They were supposed to gather enough manna for 2 days. They were supposed to trust that God would take care of them, even though they weren't even doing anything. Like, he's giving them a chance to rest, and I'm going to take care of you that day. In return, that day is dedicated to me. It's a remembrance, a sign of our covenant together. And then that principle is expounded later with the Jubilee year and the seventh year. They were supposed to not plant anything and leave that whole year as a year dedicated to God and to trusting in him to care and take care of them. So when we look at, again, like you said, you could look at this, this could be a whole class just on the Sabbath, but when you see those things, and then how all of that just gets neglected, and people did not allow their servants to rest on the Sabbath day, or they just kind of forgot the whole point of the Sabbath later by Jesus' day, or they didn't even, I mean, we don't even have a record of any Jubilee year or seventh year even being observed by the Israelites. So when you see that, you understand how far, how important this day was supposed to be, and how you understand why God was so angry with them for desecrating it like they did, because it was a holy day. It was supposed to be for him, and what did they do? They made it for themselves, or they forgot about him.
Right. I think one of the clearest instances where it ought to be impressed upon us the fact that this was more than just not doing something. Somebody could, at the end of the Sabbath day, could say, okay, did I do anything today? No, check mark. It's not just about what you do, it's about why you do, your understanding of it. Amos chapter 8 and verse number 5, verse number 4, the Lord says, hear this, you who trample on the needy and do away with the poor of the land. Amos 8 and verse 5, asking when will the new moon be over with, so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, so that we may market wheat. When will the Sabbath be over, so that we may market wheat? If you were sitting there on the Sabbath just fidgeting and jittery, ready to be able to go and sell your wheat again, you're missing the point of the Sabbath. The point of the Sabbath was to be, in a sense, at home with the Lord, enjoying the peace that came as a result of his labor. And that's tied in here within the text, because they're giving the blueprint for the Sabbath based upon the Lord. that you are to labor 6 days and to do all your work, but on the Sabbath day you should, but on the Sabbath day is a Sabbath to you. Well, why? Because the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day. He rested. And to me, that the rest of that is, I don't really see an ending in that rest that the Lord took on the Sabbath day. He was done creating. Now creation was supposed to do what creation was supposed to do and continuing to live and to thrive. But what happens? Well, you have the issue with Adam and Eve and their mistakes. Well, then you have the issues in Genesis 6, where the creation, the people that God had made that were supposed to be the family of God, they rebelled. What did the Lord have to do? He had to go to work. He had to cleanse the earth and recreate a new family with Noah. Well, then they were supposed to go. So the Lord's able to rest again. Well, then what happens in Genesis 11? Well, they rebel again. So God has to go to work again, scattering the people and recreating a new family in Abraham. Well, whenever they come out of Egypt, what's he going to do? He's going to go and rescue them out of Egypt and recreate a new family again. And that's what he wants to understand, is that I want you to be at peace with me. And you do that through the work that you have in the first 6 days of the week. Then on the Sabbath day, you need to rest it. And how far had the people gotten away by Jesus's day from this idea of having peace and being at home with God on the Sabbath day? How much they had they perverted that? Not only were they jittery on the Sabbath, not being able to relax because they couldn't wait to sell more product. But think about the examples we see with Jesus, that they were getting on him for plucking grains of wheat as they walked on the Sabbath day. Think of the people who chided an individual whenever their donkey fell into the ditch on the Sabbath day. They would not save its life because it was the Sabbath day. Yet what do we see God doing? We see him working to save life. We see him doing these things, which just goes back to what Jesus says, that the Sabbath was made for man, and man was not made the Sabbath. And if anyone could be declared as the Lord of the Sabbath, would it not be God himself in Jesus coming in the form of a man, and him in the book of Hebrews being the Sabbath rest himself? Take my yoke, for it is easy and light. You no longer have to carry the burden of sin, but you can carry my burden, which is easy and which is light. There's just so much here, Alan, like you said, that we could expand upon, but maybe we'll do that on another day. Alan, what do you have to go ahead. Finish up.
I wanted to highlight too in Deuteronomy 5, it's the parallel verse. It's basically the retelling of the Ten Commandments, and it's pretty much the same in Deuteronomy 5 as we see in Exodus chapter 20. But this is one that has kind of this extra caveat. Chapter 5, verse 12, 13, 14, pretty much word for word as before, except kind of right at the end. Notice here, so that your male and female slaves may rest as you do. And then here's one of the whys. The first why was because God rested, so there's the example. But what is the why? What is the purpose for the people of observing the Sabbath? Remember, verse 15, that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So they, on a weekly basis, are supposed to remember, not just at the Passover yearly, but on a weekly basis, they should remember something that happened on the Passover. Mm-hmm. Well, what do we do on a weekly basis? We remember that same thing on a weekly basis every Sunday. What happened, that great deliverance where God, brought us out with an outstretched arm through his son.
Reenacted the Exodus through Jesus.
Reenacted the Exodus. Absolutely. Reenacted the Passover as well. So that's what I mean by these principles are not done away with just because we have a new covenant. These big picture principles are still there, and and that's why it's important to understand the Sabbath, because that helps us understand, I think, even the Lord's Supper and our weekly worship on Sunday, and just several things, just remembering how God delivered us out of slavery through Jesus' sacrifice. So interesting kind of bonus here in Deuteronomy that's not there in Exodus.
Yep, that's great. Well, Alan, that brings us up into the verse number 12, where it transitions in a sense from their responsibilities towards God to their responsibilities for mankind. But I do want to finish up with this. So I just want us to begin In verse number 3, do not have any other gods besides me. There is only one creator that is uncreated. That is me. Do not think then you, verse number 4, that you can create something that is to represent me and that you ought to bow down to me. Don't do that. Don't think you can create that which is uncreated. But the number 3, as someone who has been created as a part of my family, and go back to Genesis chapter 1, someone who's being created in my image, make sure that you bear my image correctly, that you do not misuse my name, and that you represent me in the appropriate way. And what is one way that they can represent God? By doing just what he did on the Sabbath day, by resting, focusing on the peace that was provided by him, and enjoying that rest that he himself had enjoyed. If we want to sum up these first 4 commands, to me, they all tie into something that is a theme in Scripture, which is representation of God. As people, we bear his image. We are to image him appropriately to the world around us. And I think we see that very clearly here within those first 4 commands. And we're going to see those in Numbers 5 through 6 as well, that as you bear my image and as you represent me, that also has a lot to do with the way that you treat others who, oh, by the way, also bear my image and are to represent me. Alan, do you have anything you want to share as we conclude for this afternoon?
Yep. So just go back. We'll try to finish up the last 6: honor your father and mother, all the way to do not covet. We'll try to finish those up on Friday.
Sounds great. Alan, thank you so much for your study and for your helping to lead us in some deep considerations of this text. We hope that it's been beneficial to everyone, that you might have even a greater understanding here of the 10 Commandments by being able to look at them in their ancient context, who they were spoken to and how they might understand these, and get away maybe a little bit from our modern Western eyes, which could cause us maybe not see things as they ought to be. There's still applications. I do believe in, and I want to stress that just for a moment, that just because we look at these with ancient eyes does not mean they're not applicable to us. They are still applicable to us, but we need to understand them appropriately to begin with and accurately to begin with, and then we can make even better, more appropriate, more accurate applications within our own lives. Hope that has been something that you have enjoyed and benefited from through our study so far, and hope that you will join us on Friday as we continue to walk through history, the story of God found within the Bible, specifically here within Exodus, as the Lord gives the people commands 5 through 10 that are known as the 10 Commandments or the Decalogue. Thank you again for being here. God bless you. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll hope you'll join us again on Friday as we continue to look through here the 10 Commandments. God bless.